I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening here to Lawyers for this lecture. On behalf of Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society, we're delighted that this lecture is taking place here in Rathvilly, and an absolute delight to introduce the speaker this evening, Turtle Bunbury. No need for me to introduce Turtle to you. He's familiar to you all and a native of this place. So we're very fortunate to have somebody like Turtle agreeing to give a lecture. As you know, we have monthly lectures, usually from October to April. And they're in different parts, mainly in Carlow, but they can be in other parts of the county as well. Just a few small things. Every year, you're probably familiar with Carlow Viana, the publication that the Society produces every year. And we have some here for sale this evening. It's €15, and they're an excellent production. And thank you to our editors, Jim Shannon, who's here, and to John Kelly as well. They have done a huge job in having it produced this year. So, and there are some back copies as well available. Gary will assist you with those, and Padraig. And but anyway, you're here tonight to hear Turtle, and I'm here tonight to hear him as well, because I'm very much looking forward to this lecture. So on behalf of the Society, Turtle, you're very welcome, and we'll have a little time maybe for questions at the end.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yep. All good. Okay. Thank you, Richard. Sorry, would you like a chair? There's a spare chair here. Would you like one? Would that be useful for you?
You too.
Okay. Is this working? Is that it? No. Let me just push it all the way over. Now, let's see. Okay, is that better? Okay, good evening, Rathvilly. My goodness, there's quite a crowd out this evening. My word, my word. Richard, thank you for those lovely words. It is wonderful to be here. Thank you to the Carlow Archaeological and Historical Society, Historical and Archaeological Society, I should say, for hosting the event. I've called it here lecture number 1 from the Rathvilly Heritage Interest Group, because this is lecture number 1. We've just started a group that I'll talk about a little bit at the end. We have a huge amount to get through this evening. It's going to take me, I hope, about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, something like that is what I'm going to try and do. Yeah, so I haven't actually written a thesis on Rathvilly's history. What you're going to hear is an assemblage of thoughts and ideas that I've gathered over the course of my career as a historian, living locally. I live at Lisnava, just outside Rathvilly. I was born and bred there. So I've always had a fascination with Rathvilly. And what you're going to be subjected to for the next 45, 50 minutes is my conclusions on that. I like to begin at the beginning. I also like to get the right slide, I hope. So let's begin at the beginning. The Big Bang. From the Big Bang, I don't know whether you can see all this, we go to the planet Earth. And in that planet Earth, we have an island familiar to you all. And long, long ago, when this island was created, there was life on this island. And this creature down here, this is down in Valentia Island in County Kerry. These are his footprints. This little creature is called a Devonian tetrapod. And he is one of those creatures that was on this island 385 million years ago. I do not know if he had cousins in Rathvilly, but he might have done. He was an ancestor of sorts, certainly a cousin of the dinosaurs, who were also wandering around this very Earth upon which we now stand, until this asteroid came 65 million years ago, and that was the end of quite a lot of the dinosaurs. About 5 million years after that, the Atlantic Ocean is born, a noisy affair that gives rise to all of our mountains. The mountains around us erupt from the Earth at about this time. We then, see, we're racing through time. We're only 2.5 million years ago now. Glaciation comes in, and Ireland and Britain are covered, smothered in ice sheets, some of them rising 3 kilometers high in the sky. And that's the state of play until about 15,000 years ago, when the last ice age, when it ends. and you end up with this sort of cool, dry Arctic tundra. You might have thought you were in a cool, dry Arctic tundra this morning, actually. But those glacial meltwaters come down from the mountains, and they create our rivers. They carve out the Barrow and the Slaney, and they carry the sand and the gravel that you find beside those rivers to this day. And you end up with, as I say, rivers like the Slaney. The beautiful Slaney, which rises up in the Wicklow Mountains on the Lugnacullia, the highest mountain in Leinster, and then makes its way south into County Carlow, swings through Rathvilly, and on round Killerig, down Tullow, past Altamont Gardens, and then on into the sea in County Wexford. When this river was born, after that, it becomes forestry. And you end up with, this is what Ireland is like. We're now sort of about 8,000 years ago. These forests are blooming across Ireland, and we have our first humans in the area. This is the Mesolithic period. It's called the Middle Stone Age. And you can see on a map here, all those little dots represent places where they found stuff from the Mesolithic period. You'll also find an exhibition on that in Carlow Museum. We, after them, moved to the Neolithic period. This is the New Stone Age. And these are my favorite people, the Neolithic. They're amazing. I don't know if you've been out to the KG Fields in County Mayo, on the north of County Mayo. Absolutely amazing. It's basically, they've found what is the oldest known farming sorry, let me just get the exact expression here. The oldest known field system in the world, where they were farming 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And it's all like about 5 foot underground, but they've been working it out. And basically what you have is the knowledge of the agricultural revolution that took place over in the Fertile Crescent, over in the Middle East, about 10,000 years ago, or sorry, 8,000 years ago. It starts making its way across Europe, all the way to County Mayo. And you get these farmers, they're clearing the forests, they're converting land into extensive fields, and they're farming pigs and sheep and goats and cattle that they're somehow getting across into Ireland. It's absolutely amazing. And this one, the KG Fields, is a dairy farm. It's about 2,500 acres big, they reckon, although quite a lot of it is actually tumbled into the ocean, we think. So they are planting wheat here as well, and the wheat that they have discovered being farmed in Ireland at that time is probably emmer wheat, which descends from a crop grown 4,000 miles away in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains of present-day Iran. I'll come into how all this connects into Rathvilly in a moment. They also, just to give a little extra background, the Neolithic people, they come up with the passage graves. There's amazing things like Newgrange. This, we all know about Newgrange, but it is truly amazing. That tunnel there is 19 meters long. It's as long as this room. And on the winter solstice, every year without fail, for 5,500 years or something like that, the sun rises and shoots straight down that corridor and lights up the cavern at the end, hitting all the Celtic spirals and motifs. Absolutely unbelievable. And these guys had that precision, that ability to create these things, these clocks almost that they were, that would tell you the time of day, or time of year anyway, if not the time of day. Now, we know that the Neolithic people were here in this area, right? We've got that beauty, the Haroldstown dolmen, which I think is, I'm biased because it's very close to where I live, but I do think it's probably the most picturesque of all the dolmens in Ireland. We, of course, have the Browns Hill dolmen as well outside Carlow with its massive capstone. And Carlow is itself known as the Dolmen County because we have more megalithic monuments per square mile than anywhere else in Ireland, including 7 dolmens. Now, for those who know this area, if you can see, oh, actually, I can do it with this, can't I? Can you see the little red dot? You probably can't at the back, can you? Yes. Okay. Well, that is the dolmen, right? And that is the road from Tobinstown to Hackettstown. That's the sort of bendy bit over the river, the bridge there. That's the dolmen. And in 2018, a drone. Do you remember the long, hot summer? Do you remember that amazing summer? And the drones were flying all over Ireland, locating things. Well, can you see what's going on in the field here? Because maybe, I don't know if you can at the back, but there's a ring here, another sort of ring here, and basically it turns out that the field just beside the dolmen is riddled with ancient barrows and ring ditches and circular enclosures, and that's just one field, right? So the chances are that the same is going on here and in that field and in all those other fields all around. It turns out that the fields have a past, and we are still very much learning about what happened in these fields. So you've just got to assume that this is going on all the way to Rathvilly. This is also the age of hill forts. This is an amazing hill fort up in Donegal. We've moved into a time, we're moving into the Iron Age towards the Bronze Age now, where we're moving away from those self-contained farming communities into a new sort of warrior culture. These chieftain-run states, almost like mini-kingdoms run by chieftains that are taking control of much larger regional entities. They're centralizing trade, economy, and have substantial military forces. And these hill forts were high-status places of residence, and of ceremony and indeed of assembly. You can see on the outlines of this one where people would sit during assemblies. Now, we have a lot of them nearby. Bortinglass, 10, 12 kilometres from where we are, the hill fort capital of Ireland. And like there's no more than 100 of these hill forts in Ireland. 7 of them are in Bortinglass, on a necklace of 5 hills running around the town. We've also got lots of enclosures as well, but it's in that sort of fertile valley of the River Slaney. I know that Rathcoran, which is the one here, it's maybe not as striking as the one in Donegal, but still there are 7 of these hill forts, again filled with warriors back in the day, 2,000 years ago or so. And we know about the mass production of bronze weaponry that was going on in these places, including the very first swords and shields that we know of in Ireland. So that's to the north of Rathvilly, and then south of Rathvilly, we of course have Rathgall, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but maybe you're less familiar with the other one just north of it, called Knockeen Fort. And Rathgall is an astonishing story. I mean, 3,000 years ago, it was an industrial hub. It's an 18-acre hill fort. And it had a workshop in there for manufacturing exotic glass beads. They have found 88 beads that were translucent turquoise. They found bracelets of black jet and brown lignite, and loads of other little items, some coming from North Italy, and lots of other objects of amber, gold, and stone, and over 50,000 pottery fragments. That's what they found in this little one here. So kind of busy once upon a time. Now, moving a little bit closer to Rathvilly, the Ballybit, you might know the townland of Ballybit. The Ballybit pot or the Ballybit vessel, which you can see in Carlow Museum. It's rather beautiful. It's about 5 inches high. It's from the early Bronze Age, and it was found actually at Lisnavagh in the 1860s under a giant boulder, a 2-ton granite rock, and somehow they were moving it, and they found that underneath it. I don't know whether it was for funerary purposes or whether it was a food vessel, but I have a hunch that whoever was using that last was also buying their jewellery in Rathgall. It's the same sort of era. That is a bog road, one of the old roads of Ireland that they found under a bog in County Westmeath. And you can see all these timber planks that they came across when they were churning through to try and create peat moss. And they had to luckily stop, although quite a lot of the road got churned up before they put the halt on it. Anyway, it's absolutely amazing to go at. And the reason I have a picture of that here is because Rathvilly itself was located on an ancient road. And I don't know whether it was made of oak wood planks. I don't know if that was necessary, but it was called the Slí Cullen. And it is one of the 5 great roads that are said to have emanated out from the hill of Tara in ancient times. It came south from Tala, and then ran down the west side of the Wicklow Mountains and arrived at Rathvilly via Bortinglass. Does it sound familiar? Because that's the N81, right? So a lot of, when you drive on the N81, a lot of that is actually this ancient road that was around 2,000 years ago. It then carried on from Rathvilly down to Tullow before scooting across to Lochlan Bridge and Gores Bridge. I don't know if anybody lives in Brocklstown, or if I'm even saying the name right. Brawlstown, thank you. Well, there's a standing stone right beside the N81 there, which I think must be connected to this ancient road. Anyway, when you have a road like that, you obviously, Rathvilly is now pretty strategically located. It's on the road, it's on the river. This is a picture of lots of historical spots in and around Rathvilly. You may be relieved to know I'm not going to talk about each and every one of them. But when you're trying to figure out what was the initial settlement of Rathvilly, what was here originally, well, the clue is in the name, right? So Rath, as in ringfort. And ringforts, they're a bit more modest than those hill forts I was showing you earlier. But there's still a sort of sense of hierarchy about ringforts. Some of them are massive, that were for the big chief, and then there's littler ones for people as you move down the hierarchy. And I love ringforts, which means I'm going to be kept very busy for the remainder of my days because there are 47,000 ringforts have been identified in Ireland. They're everywhere. They're all around us here. For example, in the names, Rathmore, Raheenador, Rathdaniel. At Knocknagan, there's one. At Tobinstown, they have them there. These places all had or still have ringforts. There's a ringfort at Boch. There were 2 in Knockvey. And there's an earthworks in Coole. There's at least 1 ringfort at Lisnavar and all sorts of earthworks there. There's more in Williamstown and on and on. I mean, they are all around us, and there were probably a whole lot more once upon a time long ago. Okay. Now, I went for a walk around Rathvilly last week, and I hallucinate ringforts left, right, and centre. So I was out for a walk, and can you see what I was hallucinating here? Do you see this ring? Can you? It could be just in my head. I think we're onto something. So look, raths are ring-shaped. They have curves, and there was once upon a time the Rath of Rathvilly. And when I went for a walk up, for people in Rathvilly, it's up Burrow Lane towards Slaney View, that road up there, just down there. And I came across this sort of curve, and I thought, God, is that the sort of outline of a very big fort long ago? Maybe. I mean, those curving boundaries do quite often indicate something. And it's certainly very high up on the hill. I went down to the river and looked back up at where this site was. And, it's very high. You see these sort of strips of fields rolling down towards you. Excellent for tobogganing, by the way, if anybody's looking for a place to get toboggan. So I think we have something here. And what's more, this is a satellite photograph that it's probably quite hard to see. Can you? Oh, there we go. But can you see an outline of a ring here? I don't know if you can see that there, guys, but there is a very vague outline of a ring. Now, where I was walking was further up, sort of here. And we are just here because this is where Halligan's is over here. That's the church there, right? So it's in this field here, which Malachy has. And when you then look at this, so to give you your bearings again, that's the Rathvilly Church here. That's the site of the ring fort, and it is also said to be the site of the castle that was built by Hugh de Lacy the Norman. So it stands to reason that the Rath of Rathvilly was a large ring fort on which a castle was subsequently built, and it stands to reason that this is the location here. As to whether it was much bigger, and my suggestion was that this here, do you see that ring there? My suggestion is that, because sometimes that's how big they are. They can get enormous, these things. Anyway, I'd be fascinated to hear if anybody has anything to add to that. Okay, that's the Rath. Now, what about the Billy? To me, when I drive through Rathvilly, I always look at that wonderful weeping ash between the church and Halligan's, and it always suggests the sacred tree. You know, we often hear about Rathvilly, the Billy being from the sacred tree. But that goes back a long time, that name. There's something called the Book of Armagh, and in that there is the Additamenta, and this is written in 807 AD, roughly. And it refers to Rathvillich here in Carlow. That's a long time ago for something from 807 AD. And the name translates as the fort of the old tree or the fort of the sacred tree. So, these sacred trees, there were a lot of them. Families would have a sacred tree back in the old days, and to destroy your enemy's sacred tree was the ultimate insult, and people were constantly doing it. There were 5 main sacred trees in Ireland, but Rathvilly doesn't figure on that list. There's 2 quite close. There's one in Old Loughlin and one in Ballymoon near Castle Dermot. But who knows? I don't know. But it does seem like the sacred tree story stands up. But where was that sacred tree? Okay. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is that the name Rathvilly then was adopted by the Normans, for starters. They turned it into the barony of Rathvilly, and that is pretty huge. It's almost 45,000 acres and takes in 15 parishes and 121 townlands. Now, when we met to try and start the Rathvilly Heritage Interest Group, we wondered, crikey, that's quite a lot of territory to take in. So we decided instead we'd go for the parish of Rathvilly, which is about quarter that size. The parish of Rathvilly takes in just over 9,000 acres and 22 townlands, all running along the east side of the River Slaney from Mount Neil Bridge in the north down to Tobinstown. Okay, parishes. Parishes means we've arrived with the church, the arrival of Christianity. That is something that might be familiar to you all, or many of you. You recognise it. It is, of course, Patrick, the famous incident of Patrick being baptising King Crimthan of Leinster, Crimthan the McKenny, roughly said to have happened in about 450 AD. And Crimthan was from the Kinslers, or the O'Kinslers, who were the kings of Leinster. He reigned for quite a long reign, from about 443 to 483 AD, so 40 years. And his time actually would coincide when all those ringforts I was banging on about earlier, when they were at their peak, I think. The O'Kinslers would claim descent from a guy called Any Kinsler, who may or may not be true. Some of the sagas claim that Any's son, Yoku, and sorry about all the names, I'm terrible at pronouncing the names, that this guy, Yoku, killed Niall of the Nine Hostages, if you know of Niall of the Nine Hostages. And that wasn't a great move, because Niall had a lot of children. In fact, we're all apparently descended from Niall of the Nine Hostages. Anyway, one of those children eventually tracked down his father's killer and killed him. And then Crimthan, who's the brother of the guy who'd just been killed, keep up, he then became King of Leinster after killing another of Niall of the Nine Hostages' children. Honestly, it's a laugh a minute, the old annals about what goes on. Anyway, so Crimthan becomes the King of Leinster, and then he's baptised by Rathvilly, baptised in Rathvilly. And, whether the truth is, it's always hard to know, because the events were written about 200-300 years later. But the story of the King of Leinster being baptised in Rathvilly comes from a guy called Aid, who wrote the first sort of life story of St. Patrick, and he lived at Slatey, just outside Carlow. Where did this happen? Well, these guys might know, but it is possibly down by Patrick's Well, down St. Patrick's Lane. If you motor on down there to the well, that's one of the places they say it maybe happened. Or maybe it was in the river itself. It seems like a logical place to baptize somebody as well. Some say it's in the moat. Many of you would have heard of the moat or the mott. I don't think so. Other people also say that this was where King Crimthan lived, that this was his palace. I don't think so. The reason why is because it's kind of what a motte and bailey look like. That's a motte and bailey there. That's the moat. And it's also known as the mott. And the mott was a Norman invention that came in with the Normans. So it's unlikely that King Crimthan was hanging out on a mott 500 years before the Normans came. Anyway, right. Okay, how are we doing on time? We're racing along and I'm only just getting to the Christians. Right. Okay. Here we go. There's Waterstown Cross in Rathvilly, because there are lots and lots of relics of early Christianity in Ireland, before even perhaps the Roman Church was making its influence, the Celtic Christian era. And that, for example, is in Waterstown, north of Rathvilly. It's a 7-foot-high stone cross. It's beside a ruined church, and there's an old graveyard, and there's another bit of a cross there as well. And it's actually, we think, on a pilgrimage route, and maybe somebody can fill me in on this, but we understand that there was a pilgrimage route that started at Patrick's Well and finished here at Waterstown back in, long, long ago. Incidentally, Germain's near Lisnavagh, there was a round granite boulder with an incised Latin cross that was found there during a field clearance in the 50s. We live right beside the River Derreen, or very close to it, and there is Acorn. And Acorn is the smallest townland in County Carlow. And it, again, has the last vestiges of an ancient monastery there. The graves are 18th century, but the monastery is supposed to be 6th, 7th century. And there's, again, like little bits of crosses and arched doorways. It's all disappearing slowly into the earth. I have written a lengthy piece about Acorn for Carloviana, if anybody's interested in that. Then, you go to somewhere like Clonmore, and it's littered with places. They've gathered them all into one spot. But there are so many of these relics in and around. Castle Dermot is a hotspot full of things, with, including its high crosses and so on. Now, when you have Christians, you tend to, in most parts of Ireland, get these guys coming in, the Vikings looking for plunder. But I actually, longing to be disproved, but I can't find any record particularly of Viking activity in Carlow. There is this grave in Castle Dermot, which is a Viking grave beside the church in Castle Dermot, a hogsback grave it's called. But I don't know of any definitive Viking connection. We do know these guys came, of course, the Normans. There's a poor old King Harold getting it in the eye at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. So 100 years or so later, the Normans then end up coming across to Ireland. Well, we can assume they loved agricultural land, so naturally enough, they were going to quickly home in on the fertile Slaney Valley and all the area around Rathvilly. Now, I mentioned that castle earlier. Now, that is attributed to this guy called Hugh de Lacy, as in de Lacy Abbey, in fact, who built a lot of castles in Ireland on his time. I don't know if he actually oversaw the building of all of these, but they're all credited to him. Kilkea Castle outside near Castle Dermot is a very good example of one that's still sort of in existence. So he, as I say, is credited with building the castle here. His father was a Knight Templar, who did a lot of activity in North Africa and in the Middle East. And they were learning about castle building at that time. That was what the Normans, that was their key thing. They realized, hey, we can make castles out of stone, stick them on rivers and in strategic places, and that's how we're going to conquer the world. And they conquered the known world in many ways at that time, or a lot of it. So then that same man, Hugh de Lacy, that's what Tullow Castle in Tullow, County Carlow. That's what it apparently looked like once upon a time. And it would be behind Aldi and behind the church there, sort of in that territory. Again, attributed to Hugh de Lacy. There were other castles, by the way, at Rathmore apparently had one, Williamstown apparently had one. But this was all part when Tullow, and this again is relevant to Rathvilly, because Rathvilly, the barony of Rathvilly takes in Tullow, and this all is part of the Cantred of Offalmouth. Sounds like something from Game of Thrones, the Cantred of Offalmouth, or Tullow Phelim, as it's also known. And this is going to pass to a family called Butler, who are one of the Norman families who'd come over. We have mentions of the castle at various times during this guy's reign. There's quite a lot in the 1340s. And, you know, there's a lot to work out and try and figure out what was this castle, what was going on, what was its area. And you may be delighted to know, I'm not going to tell you all about that because I don't know. But what you can say is that Rathvilly, its importance was still enormous. It was very strategic. It's still on a main road and it's on the river. You know, that's a very important point. Who wouldn't want it? If we spin forward to the 16th century, this is a scene from Silken Thomas's rebellion. Silken Thomas Fitzgerald, who was about to become the very short-lived Earl of Kildare. And he could see which way things were turning under the Tudors, under Henry VIII, who had his evil eye on Ireland and its churches. And so he launched this disastrous rebellion to try and kick the Tudor army out of Ireland, and lost badly. He was executed along with 5 of his uncles in London, and a major effort was made by the Tudors to eliminate the Fitzgerald family from Ireland forevermore. Anyway, one of the guys who helped defeat Silken Thomas was called Red Piers Butler, the 8th Earl of Ormond, and as part of his reward, he was given the castle in Rathvilly, and indeed he was given the town of Rathvilly. So the Butlers owned, at this point, they also, for the record, owned Clonmore, Tullow, Powerstown, Kellistown, Loughlin, and Arklow. That's what you get if you're on the winning team in a rebellion in that era. And you end up with that. You probably have heard of the Butler-Fitzgerald showdown, but that's playing out during this time. And look at the armor that they were wearing. Isn't that amazing? So we have the Wizard Earl. He's the Earl of Kildare, who is living in Kilkea Castle, not far from here. He's the one with the red armband, which signifies that he'd fought in the Mediterranean against Turks when he was younger. And this guy here, Black Tom of Butler, the next Earl of Ormond, who has got himself a little shotgun. You know, we're in the 16th century. And he is besties with Queen Elizabeth. He's a cousin through Anne Boleyn, if you know all that story. Anne Boleyn was a member of the Butler family. So this sort of showdown is going on, and it is relevant to Rathvilly because if you were to go to Baltinglass, in the Cistercian Abbey in Baltinglass, you will see this sort of tombstone here, standing up. It wasn't how it was originally. And that belongs to a guy called James Grace, who was the constable of Rathvilly for Black Tom Butler in the 1570s. So, you know, there's Rathvilly still had a castle that required a constable at this point. That abbey, that's Baltinglass Abbey. It's absolutely wonderful, isn't it, when you approach Baltinglass and you see that as you arrive. It was run by the Cistercians, and they had acquired about 2,500 acres at the time. They were the Coolmore of its day, the Cistercians, always acquiring land. And they had 2,300 acres, but that was closed down during the Reformation that I talked about, and it was handed to the Eustace family. Now, we are speeding through the 17th century into the 18th century, and you know, I'm gathering facts, what I can, about the era. I know that we have records of a guy called Thomas Ram, who was on the hunt for priests around Rathvilly in the reign of King James I. We've got records of Rathvilly Castle being seized in 1641. That's during the Confederate Rebellion. And it's held in the name of Piers Fitzgerald. So the Fitzgeralds have it off the Butlers for a while. And he was a member of the Supreme Council of the Confederacy, which was headquartered in Kilkenny. Anyway, so he's got it for a while. Then we hear of the castle being attacked by General Hewson, or Colonel Hewson, Hewson, as in Bono. Maybe it was Bono's ancestor. Anyway, he severely damaged the castle in Rathvilly. And you'd have thought that might be the end of it, but apparently it was rebuilt and used as a residence until 1736. So I'd be fascinated to know if anybody knows more of that, or indeed of why, because I still don't know, why the area is known as Cromwell's Fort. Is it connected to this man, or is it not? I don't know, but I'd love to know. Okay, so our family arrived to County Carlow in the wake of the English Civil War. This is my Bunbury family. And we arrived in the Rathvilly neighbourhood in the 1660s and leased the farmland, which my brother and father before him farmed at Lisnavar and Tobinstown. And we acquired it outright, we think, in 1708 from the Duke of Ormond. So we were firmly on the Butler Ormond camp at that time. And these are sort of gravestones from the family from the church at St. Mary's. There is St. Mary's in Rathvilly, which is a wonderful church. It's the Bunbury, the Protestant church. It was built in the 1740s, and it's really lovely. When it was first built, the rector of Rathvilly was a guy called William Robertson, and he was the rector for 30 years or something. And for those who know about the Enlightenment, there was a philosopher called Francis Hutchinson, and what I didn't realize is that William Robinson, who was the rector of Rathvilly, studied under this Enlightenment philosopher for a long time. So maybe he brought a little dash of the Enlightenment to the parish. The Enlightenment would also trigger the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and in turn, 1798, and the 1798 rebellion here in Ireland, the United Irishmen. And, reading the records from the period leading up to the 1798, Rathvilly, there's quite a lot of violence, but I guess they're not recording all the moments of peace, they're recording the violence. But there are endless bare-knuckle fights, and there's a lot of forgery going on, quite a number of murders as well. And so much so that by 1796, the Rathvilly Cavalry are formed by the Eustace brothers and a guy called John Thomas Whelan of Clonmore Lodge. And then, the notorious Reverend Whitty also gets involved. So they're sort of forming one team, and then, of course, in Tullow, you're going to get Father John Murphy and the United Irishmen. So it becomes, in this area, there are a lot of pikemen. A lot of people join the United Irishmen, and there are scattered records of all sorts of horrible things. It was a nasty, nasty summer. 30,000 people were killed over the course of the summer of 1798, including a number in these parts. And of course, it didn't work out for the United Irishmen. For Lisnavar, I often wondered whether it might have been burnt, but there's no record of any burnings up there. But there is a record from 1806, so nearly a decade afterwards, somebody writing about it. He says, all the Protestant houses from Bortinglass to Hacketstown, from there, as in Hacketstown, to Rathdrum, and from there to Blessington, were burnt by the rebels. They also burnt a great number of houses in the road between Rathvilly and Hacketstown. So that sounds like a pretty smoky, dark time to have been in the neighbourhood. On the plus side, I found a record that the Reverend Daniel Murphy, the parish priest of Rathvilly, he survived the 1798 rebellion and died in December 1798, aged 102. So it's pretty good going for the Reverend Murphy. Quarter of a century after the rebellion, I don't know if you're familiar with this building, Disraeli School, Bok. A guy called Benjamin Disraeli, who is sort of connected to this guy who became the Prime Minister of Britain, also called Benjamin Disraeli. He may have been a great uncle, but it's more likely a slightly distant cousin. Anyway, the original Benjamin Disraeli, he'd made his fortune. He'd won the lotto in the early 19th century. And he left £3,000, which is an enormous sum in those days, for the establishment of a non-denominational school for the education of the poor of Rathvilly. That's what it was described at originally. And so Bach is a school where many people from the area were at school there when it was operating. And incidentally, if anybody knows Birmingham, you might know about Rathvilly School in Birmingham. There's a Rathvilly School in Birmingham, which was established by a former schoolmistress from Bach called Mary Earle. And she set up the Rathvilly School in Birmingham in 1896. Okay, then so Rathvilly's evolving. There's the wonderful corn mill, a photo from the late Victorian age. And there it is as it looks last week. Rathvilly, the records, there are a lot of records that I haven't gone through for the 19th century about what Rathvilly was, what was happening here. But there is a man who stands out. You know this place because it's just around the corner, perhaps. Phelan Street, actually not Phelan Row. This area was called Scots Row, and it's called Phelan Street. And the name is in honour of a guy called Father John Phelan. He was the parish priest here in Rathvilly from 1886 till 1903. And he was head of the National League. This is the time of the land wars and Charles Stewart Parnell and all that. And in fact, Parnell apparently came to Rathvilly, and it was the height of the Kitty O'Shea controversy, and people threw stones at him, and the poor man left. I don't know whether there's a richer record or that. That's just hearsay, I think. Anyway, Father Phelan did a lot for the poor. He was big on providing better housing for the poor. And apparently the housing along here was substandard. He had it rebuilt. And they opened for business shortly after his death in 1903, or about the time of his death. And they decided to name the road in honour of him. His greater legacy, another major legacy of Father Phelan was the church, St. Patrick's Church in Rathvilly. He didn't start this, it was the previous parish priest called Father Nolan, but he finished it. And it only took 4 years to build, which is an amazing achievement in those times. They started it I think in 1883. It was the land upon which it was built was actually gifted by the then Lord Rathsonnell back in 1883. That's right, he gifted it to the Roman Catholic parish of Rathvilly, which was a wise move on his behalf. The church was there within 4 years. Amazing achievement. Now, if you go to here, you recognise this is where, for those who don't know Rathvilly, this is what it looks like out that door when it's not freezing cold. This is Lawlor's. Now, for those who do know Rathvilly, this is going to make a bit more sense in a moment. Look at the view for a moment. 3, 2, 1. Now look at the view, okay? Here is an old photograph of Rathvilly showing, we think, in about the 1880s, the vista there now, okay? And what you can see is, I will use this, but can people at the back actually see a red dot? Yeah. You can, okay. Right, well then that was the original chapel. It was built in the 1780s by Father Wall, and it was a sort of slated building that tumbles into, the phoenix is out of view, but you can see where that is now. And it was still in use as a school, as a national school in 1883. And then when they opened the new church in 1886, it kind of closed down, and eventually they demolished it. And for those who are interested, the altar rails from the old church ended up in Talbotstown, I believe. Anyway, you can see here also the sort of thing jutting out onto the street, which is no longer there, the portico. That was the original priest's house until they built the parochial hall up at the other end of the village I think in the 1950s, was it? I'm not sure. So some quite good little old pictures of Rathvilly. And how are we doing on time? Yes, I've got a few more old pictures of Rathvilly to fire you through, and then I'll let you go. That's a close-up of that portico. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could figure out who these guys were? I'm not sure we can get a close enough look at them. There is the other big thing. The 1880s it's all happening in Rathvilly in the 1880s. You've got the new church, You've got the railway coming, and the railway station, and the station master's house. I'll show you a picture of that later. And indeed the GAA happening. It's all going on in the 1880s. The Rathvilly station opened in 1886, and so did the station in Tullow. And that was when the boarding glass line was extended down to both places. So now we're all connected from Tullow to Rathvilly all the way up to Naas. Such a pity that that no longer exists, right? And you go down, if you're wondering where it is, there's a road called Station Road, which leads you down to, there's another picture of the old station from the Victorian age. Or maybe early Edwardian, and there is the railway station as it is today, down by where Halligan's are, with the funeral parlour. So, then a lot. If you're interested in the history of Rathvilly, this guy has written about it quite extensively long ago. Edward O'Toole. He was the teacher here. He lived from 1860 to 1943. And he lived through all this stuff. And I mentioned in the 1880s, the GAA came to Rathvilly, and the football club was founded. The football team appointed him as their first captain as well. So he was deep in it, and he's written all about it in a book called "Wished for Your Life, That's Treason." There is the Rathvilly GAA as it is today. Right into the First World War. Tommy Doyle has done a lot of work on this. We know, I think, I might be corrected, I think we've established that 16 people from Rathvilly were killed during the war, including this man, Abraham Watchhorn from Williamstown, who was actually killed in Dublin. He was in Easter Rising, and he was one of the people who thought he was off to France and then found himself heading back to Ireland and dealing with something that he was not expecting to deal with. And so he was among those killed. Some of you may remember wonderful Nellie O'Toole, who grew up on Phelan Street and who I interviewed for a project called Vanishing Ireland. Absolutely wonderful woman. As I say, she was born on Phelan Street in 1909. So her memories were invaluable for when I was interviewing her. She spoke about the Spanish flu, which came into this neighbourhood at the end of the First World War. It killed more people than the First World War itself across the world. And it was pretty relentless around here as well. She said all 13 houses on Phelan Street were hit by it, and certainly Tobinstown, where I live, there was a number of fatalities around there. She said a soup wagon came down from Rathvilly, from Lisnavar, every day with 2 big churns of soup, for which the Lady Rathdonnell of the time got a letter from the Board of Guardians for the kindly and considerable help which she has given to the people of Rathvilly and the neighbourhood during the present serious epidemic. And those good deeds would stand the family, that's the Bunbury family, would stand them in good stead when the War of Independence came on, very soon after that, 2 months later, in fact. I'm not going to go into the revolution here. I've spoken in Rathvilly a few times about extraordinary people like Michael Fay and indeed Kevin Barry, of course. And also I had the Michael Collins thing because there's a few connections. Nellie's brother, apparently Nellie O'Toole, I mentioned earlier, her brother was apparently driving Michael Collins around for a few months anyway. The revolution, it was, needless to say, it was massive in this neighbourhood. After Kevin Barry's death, his sister Kathleen married a guy called Jim Maloney, and Jim's brother Con Maloney was a very influential figure. He would go on to become Deputy Chief of Staff of the IRA and of the anti-treaty IRA. So we're moving from the War of Independence into the Civil War. And needless to say, there was quite a lot of destruction in the neighbourhood. Rathmore Bridge got trashed. The railway station was burned down and rebuilt. The constabulary barracks, the Royal Irish Constabulary Barracks in Rathvilly, that was burned down. Not many big houses. There were over 300 big houses were burned in Ireland, and only 3 in County Carlow. None of them in the Rathvilly neighbourhood. Certainly way below the national county average. Okay, we are nearly there, guys. I mentioned the station master's house. Isn't that rather lovely? Just down by the railway. The railway closed in 1960. Boo, I think. And all the line from Tullow to Rathvilly, because people often ask, could we turn it into a greenway? I'm willing to stand corrected, but I understand that the line all the way from Tullow to Rathvilly and then all the way from Rathvilly to Bortinglass was backfilled and filled in. And all the bridges taken down, with one exception, the one at Tankardstown. Again, I'm willing to stand corrected, but apart from a very short stretch around Ballinure, you're not going to get a greenway out of it. But we have the station master's house survives, and the station house that I showed you earlier. And then into the happier times. Thank you, Patrick Halligan, for this picture of the Very Reverend Father Cullen with Martin Cody, Miley Brennan and Joe Toole preparing Rathvilly for its great triumph as it takes the top award, the loveliest village in Ireland, the tidy town era, which is a wonderful part of the glorious 1960s in Rathvilly, another golden age. In the blurb for the talk, it said that I was going to talk about In Tua Nua. I'm going to come on to them, but there's another band I have to mention. I was always fascinated by the truck. Oh, hang on. Sorry, there, look at that. Totally forgot about that. That's a lovely picture that some of you might not have seen before. It went on a calendar for Rathvilly after its victory in the Tidy Towns contest in, I think, 1962. But a pretty wonderful picture of the place looking lovely in those lovely, cheerful cars that everybody had. Now, we've got it right this time. There we go. Two's Company. As a child growing up, I was always fascinated by the Two's Company van in Rathvilly. So I thought we'd have to give a nod to Mary Darcy and Eamon McRory, who sang songs, and I bet you some of you still know the words to Eileen McManus, Dear John, and You're My Best Friend. Okay, but for me, it was Leslie Dowdall and In Tua Nua, my first crush when in the 80s. Leslie, who grew up just outside Rathvilly, when she and 6 lads formed In Tua Nua and got signed by Island Records, and we're going to go on to amazing things. Sadly, it didn't quite happen, but she's still released a few solo albums. And if you don't know it, Somebody to Love. Listen to it on YouTube. It's a rocking song. Okay. I think we're just about there. This, I'm not expecting you to read it in your own time. This is some detail about the Rathvilly Heritage Interest Group. If you've got stories, and I bet you do, about Rathvilly, if you are able to email it, we have an email address called rathvillyhig@gmail.com, but we can fill in the details. The main point is that it exists. The Rathvilly Heritage Interest Group is up and running, and this was its first lecture. Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks very much. Sorry. Repeat a few questions if there are. I suppose, yeah, I'll give it a whirl. Okay.
Turtle, thank you so much for a most interesting lecture.
Thank you.
We have really a packed house here, but if there we hopefully will have time for some questions. If you have any questions, I'm sure Turtle will
give it a shot.
Yes. Any questions?
Excellent. I've answered it. It's good.
You've answered all the questions.
I will be here for just a little while if anybody has a few things to say.
Just a comment.
Michael.
Just when Parnell addressed here, came here, and the people at Hackettstown, you may know, a large body of people came over. I think Rathvilly were anti-Parnellite, and Hackettstown were Parnellites.
Aha, right, okay.
So there was a bit of a standoff, or more than a standoff. It was a bit of a set to where the Hackettstown, Hackettstown Parnellites were being shouting down the anti-Parnellites. So I don't think many people heard what Parnell had to say.
I see. So it's Hackettstown against Rathvilly.
Yes.
Parnell. Okay.
Exactly.
There we go.
Exactly. Yeah.
No change, says somebody. No, that's not helpful.
Thank you, Michael. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
Okay.
just on behalf of this Carlow Historical and Historical and Archaeological Society, again, thank you so much, Turtle, and we wish your group well as you start getting more and more information of the area.
Thank you.
Our next lecture will be on the 21st of February, and the venue is Loughlin Bridge, and the lecturer will be Dr. Declan Monaghan, and the topic is the origins and history of the Irish national stud, 1900 to 2021. So that's in Loughlin Bridge on the 21st of February at 8 p.m. and you're most welcome to attend that. Again, can I thank you all so much for coming here in such huge numbers tonight. If you would like to become a member of the Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society, you can talk to one of the members here, and Helen and Padraig and Gary and John are all here, and there are others as well, and Jim, and you'd be most welcome to become a member. And as I said, there are issues of Carlow Piana here, including the up-to-date publication, the one we launched just before Christmas. So thank you all very much for coming, and again, can I express on your behalf our very best thanks to Turtle for giving us the most wonderful lecture.